The rusted hull of the cargo ship, Meridian's Pride, creaked ominously as Sarah Chen stepped onto the dock at Baltimore Harbor, her German shepherd, Luna, pressing close to her side. The morning fog rolled in thick from the Chesapeake Bay, making the massive vessel look like something emerging from a nightmare, rather than the inheritance that was supposed to change her life. "That's it," Sarah muttered, staring up at the towering wall of corroded steel. "That's what Uncle Marcus left me," Luna whined softly, her ears flattened against her head as she stared at the ship. The dog had been acting strange all morning, refusing to eat her breakfast and pacing restlessly around Sarah's small apartment in Fells Point. Now, standing before the vessel, Luna's behavior was becoming increasingly agitated. The harbor master, a grizzled man named Pete Kowalski, approached with a clipboard and the expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "You Sarah Chen? The one who inherited this floating disaster?" "That's me," Sarah replied, trying to inject more confidence into her voice than she felt. After 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Navy engineer, she'd thought she was prepared for anything, but the sight of the deteriorating ship was making her question every decision that had led her to this moment. "Well, I got bad news and worse news," Pete said, scratching his gray beard. "Bad news is, you got 30 days to either make this thing seaworthy or pay to have it scrapped. Worse news is, scrapping's gonna cost you about $200,000. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She'd left the Navy 6 months ago with a modest disability pension and dreams of starting her own marine salvage business. Her uncle's unexpected bequest had seemed like a gift from heaven, until now. "What's wrong with it?" she asked, though the rust stains and missing deck plates already suggested the answer. "Where do I start? Engine's been dead for 15 years, hull's got more holes than Swiss cheese, and the Coast Guard red-tagged it for safety violations back in 2008. Your uncle bought it at auction for scrap value, but he never got around to actually scrapping it." Luna suddenly barked sharply, a sound Sarah had learned to recognize during their time together in the service. It wasn't her normal bark. This was her alert signal, the one she'd used to warn about IEDs and hostile movement in the Afghan mountains. "What is it, girl?" Sarah asked, kneeling down to scratch behind Luna's ears. The dog was staring intently at the ship's superstructure, her body tense and ready. Pete followed Luna's gaze and shrugged. "Probably just rats. Ship's been sitting here so long it's become a regular hotel for every vermin in Baltimore Harbor." But Sarah knew Luna better than that. The dog had been her partner for 2 years overseas, and her instincts had saved Sarah's life more than once. If Luna was alerting to something, there was definitely something worth investigating. "I need to get aboard," Sarah said, standing up and adjusting the tool belt around her waist. "Can you arrange access?" Pete looked at her like she'd suggested swimming with sharks. "Lady, I wouldn't go aboard that death trap if you paid me. The deck plates are rotted through, the railings are held together with rust and prayer, and God knows what kind of toxic chemicals are still sloshing around in the holds." "I'm a trained marine engineer," Sarah replied firmly. "I've worked on damaged vessels in combat zones. I think I can handle an old cargo ship." "Your funeral," Pete muttered, pulling out a ring of keys. "But you sign a waiver first, and you wear a safety harness. And if you fall through the deck and break your neck, don't come crying to me." 20 minutes later, Sarah was standing on the main deck of the Meridian's Pride, Luna at her side, both of them wearing safety equipment that Pete had grudgingly provided. The ship was even worse up close. Rust had eaten through entire sections of the superstructure, and the deck was littered with debris from years of neglect. But Luna wasn't interested in the obvious damage. The dog was moving purposefully toward the stern, her nose to the ground, following some scent that only she could detect. "What have you got, Luna?" Sarah asked, following her partner toward a series of cargo hatches that had been welded shut with crude amateur workmanship. Luna stopped at the largest hatch and began pawing at the metal, whining in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. It was the same sound the dog had made when they'd discovered a hidden weapons cache in Kandahar. Excited, but also deeply disturbed by whatever she was sensing. Sarah examined the welding more closely. It was recent work, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and it had been done quickly and carelessly. More importantly, it had been done from the outside, as if someone had been trying to keep something in, rather than keep people out. "Uncle Marcus, what the hell were you up to?" Sarah whispered, running her fingers along the rough weld seams. Marcus Chen had been her father's older brother, a merchant marine who'd spent 40 years sailing the world's oceans before retiring to a small house in Annapolis. Sarah had only met him a handful of times, but he'd always seemed like a straightforward man, practical, honest, and completely uninterested in anything that didn't involve ships or the sea. The idea that he'd been involved in something secretive enough to require welding cargo hold shut was completely out of character. Luna's whining grew more insistent, and she began scratching at the deck near the hatch, with enough force to leave marks in the metal. Sarah had seen this behavior before, always when Luna had detected something that posed a potential threat. "Okay, girl, I hear you," Sarah said, pulling out her phone to take pictures of the welded hatches. "We'll figure out what's down there." As she documented the unusual modifications to the ship, Sarah became aware of voices coming from the dock below. She moved to the rail and looked down to see Pete talking to two men in expensive suits who definitely didn't look like they belonged in a working harbor. "Told you, she just got here this morning," Pete was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Inherited it from her uncle." "And you're sure she doesn't know anything?" one of the suited men asked. He was tall and thin, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that suggested he spent most of his time indoors. How could she? Marcus never told nobody nothing about what he was doing with that ship. Kept to himself, paid his dock fees in cash, never caused no trouble. The second man, shorter and stockier than his companion, pulled out what looked like a photograph. "This is her, right? Sarah Chen, former Navy engineer, served in Afghanistan, discharged 6 months ago?" Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning fog. These men knew who she was, and they were asking questions about Uncle Marcus and the ship. That couldn't be a coincidence. She pulled out her phone and started recording, zooming in on the two men as they continued their conversation with Pete. "We need to know the moment she finds anything unusual," the tall man was saying. "Anything at all. And if she starts asking questions about her uncle's activities, we need to know about that too." "Look, I don't know what kind of business you guys are in," Pete replied, "but I run a clean operation here. I don't spy on my customers, and I don't get involved in whatever drama they might have going on." The shorter man reached into his jacket and pulled out what was clearly a thick envelope. "We're not asking you to do anything illegal, Mr. Kowalski. We just want to be kept informed about any developments regarding the Meridian's Pride. Think of it as a consulting fee." Pete stared at the envelope for a long moment, then reluctantly took it. "I don't like this," he muttered. "You don't have to like it," the tall man replied. "You just have to make a phone call if anything interesting happens." Luna suddenly barked again, loud enough that the sound carried down to the dock. All three men looked up, and Sarah quickly ducked behind a piece of rusted equipment, her heart pounding. "She's up there now," Pete said. "Good," the tall man replied. "Let her look around. But remember, we want to know everything she finds." The two men walked away, leaving Pete standing alone on the dock, staring up at the ship with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read from her hiding spot. After waiting several minutes to make sure the men were gone, Sarah emerged from her hiding place and made her way back to the welded cargo hatch. Luna was still there, still agitated, still pawing at the metal as if she could somehow claw her way through solid steel. "Those men knew about Uncle Marcus," Sarah said quietly to her dog. "They knew about me, about my service record, about when I inherited this ship. That means whatever's down there, it's important enough that people are watching for it." She pulled out her phone and called the one person she knew she could trust, her former commanding officer, Commander Janet Rodriguez, who now worked for Naval Criminal Investigative Service in Washington. "Sarah, this is a surprise. How's civilian life treating you?" "It's complicated, Commander. I need to ask you about my uncle, Marcus Chen. Did his name ever come up in any Navy investigations?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Why are you asking?" "Because I just inherited his ship, and there are some very interested parties asking questions about what I might find aboard it." "Sarah, where are you right now?" "Baltimore Harbor, standing on the deck of a cargo ship called Meridian's Pride." "Get off that ship, right now." The urgency in Commander Rodriguez's voice sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What's going on?" "I can't discuss it over the phone, but your uncle's name has come up in some very sensitive investigations. If there are people watching you, then you could be in real danger. Commander, I'm not running away from this. Whatever Uncle Marcus was involved in, I need to know. And there's something on this ship that my dog is alerting to. Something important. Another pause. Longer this time. Sarah, I'm going to tell you something that's classified, but you need to understand what you might be dealing with. 3 years ago, we started investigating a human trafficking network that was using decommissioned cargo ships to transport people from Central America to ports along the East Coast. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Human trafficking? The operation was sophisticated, well-funded, and extremely violent. We managed to shut down most of it, but we never found the main staging area. We suspected it was a ship, somewhere along the eastern seaboard, but we could never locate it. And you think Uncle Marcus was involved? We think your uncle may have discovered something he shouldn't have. He contacted the FBI about 6 months before he died, said he had information about criminal activity in Baltimore Harbor, but he died of a heart attack before he could provide details. Sarah looked down at Luna, who was still pawing at the welded hatch, and suddenly everything made terrible sense. Commander, I think I know where your missing staging area is. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Do not attempt to investigate this on your own. These people are extremely dangerous, and if they think you're getting close to something they want to keep hidden, they won't hesitate to eliminate you. But if there are people trapped down there, then we'll handle it through proper channels. Get off that ship and meet me in Washington. We'll figure out the next steps together. Sarah ended the call and stared down at the welded hatch. Everything in her training told her to follow orders, to get off the ship and let the professionals handle whatever was down there. But everything in her heart told her that if there were people trapped below deck, every minute of delay could mean the difference between life and death. Luna looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and Sarah could swear the dog was trying to tell her something. In Afghanistan, she'd learned to trust Luna's instincts completely. The dog had never been wrong about danger, and she'd never been wrong about when immediate action was required. "What do you think, girl?" Sarah asked quietly. "Do we wait for backup, or do we find out what's down there?" Luna barked once, sharp and decisive, then returned to pawing at the hatch. Sarah made her decision. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Commander Rodriguez with her exact location and what she suspected. Then she went back to her truck and retrieved her portable cutting torch. If people were trapped below deck, she wasn't going to let them suffer while bureaucrats and investigators debated jurisdiction and proper procedure. She was going to cut through that hatch and find out what Uncle Marcus had died trying to expose. As she fired up the torch and began cutting through the crude welds, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to discover something that would change everything she thought she knew about her uncle, about the ship, and about the price some people were willing to pay for freedom. The metal began to glow red-hot under the flame, and Luna's whining grew more urgent. Whatever was down there, they were about to find out. If you're as captivated by Sarah's dangerous discovery as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss what she finds below deck. Drop a comment and tell us, do you think Sarah is making the right choice by investigating on her own? Your engagement helps us bring you more incredible stories like this, so don't forget to give this video a thumbs up too. The first section of welded metal fell away with a clang that echoed through the empty cargo hold, and immediately Sarah knew that Commander Rodriguez's worst fears were justified. The smell that rose from the opening was unmistakable. Human waste, unwashed bodies, fear, and desperation. It was a smell she remembered from refugee camps in Afghanistan, the smell of people who had been confined in impossible conditions for far too long. Luna's reaction was immediate and intense. The dog began barking frantically, not the alert bark she'd been using before, but the urgent, demanding bark she used when she'd found survivors in collapsed buildings. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, covering her nose with her shirt as she peered down into the darkness below. "There are people down there." She pulled out her phone's flashlight and shined it into the hold. What she saw made her stomach lurch. The cargo space had been crudely converted into a series of small compartments, each barely large enough for a person to lie down. Makeshift bunks were stacked 3 high along the walls, and she could see evidence of recent habitation: blankets, water containers, and the kind of improvised sanitation facilities that spoke of people who had been trapped for weeks or months. But the hold appeared to be empty now, which raised even more disturbing questions. Where were the people who had been living in these conditions? And why had Uncle Marcus welded the hatches shut? "Hello?" Sarah called down into the darkness. "Is anyone down there?" The only response was the echo of her own voice and Luna's continued barking. But as Sarah listened more carefully, she thought she could hear something else. A faint tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the ship. She grabbed her emergency rope from her gear bag and secured it to a solid piece of deck equipment. "Stay here, Luna," she commanded, but the dog was having none of it. As soon as Sarah began rappelling down into the hold, Luna was right behind her, scrambling down the rope with the agility that had made her such an effective partner in the mountains of Afghanistan. The smell was overwhelming at the bottom of the hold, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the evidence around her. This had definitely been a human trafficking operation, and a sophisticated one. The compartments were designed to maximize the number of people who could be transported while minimizing the space required. Crude ventilation systems had been installed, along with basic plumbing that connected to the ship's existing water and waste systems. But what disturbed Sarah most was the evidence of violence. Scratch marks on the walls, blood stains on some of the bunks, and restraint systems that suggested not everyone had been here voluntarily. Luna was moving purposefully toward the far end of the hold, following her nose toward whatever was producing that faint tapping sound. Sarah followed, her flashlight beam dancing across the makeshift living quarters, trying to piece together the story of what had happened here. At the rear of the hold, Luna stopped at what appeared to be a solid bulkhead. But as Sarah examined it more closely, she realized it was another crude modification. Someone had welded a steel plate over what had originally been a doorway leading to the next cargo compartment. The tapping was definitely coming from the other side of the wall. "Hello?" Sarah called out, pressing her ear to the metal. "Can you hear me?" The tapping stopped for a moment, then resumed with increased urgency. It was definitely a human sound, someone trying to communicate through the steel barrier. Sarah pulled out her cutting torch again, but hesitated. If there were people on the other side of this wall, she needed to be careful not to injure them with sparks or hot metal. Instead, she began looking for another way through. Luna had found something interesting near the base of the wall, a small ventilation grate that had been partially concealed by debris. Sarah cleared away the trash and discovered that the grate was loose, held in place by only a few screws that had corroded over time. Using a multi-tool from her kit, she quickly removed the screws and pulled the grate away. The opening was small, barely large enough for Luna to squeeze through, but it was enough to get a better sense of what was on the other side. "Luna, search," Sarah commanded, and the dog immediately pushed through the opening and disappeared into the darkness beyond. For several terrifying minutes, Sarah could hear Luna moving around in the adjacent compartment, occasionally barking or whining. Then the dog reappeared at the opening, her tail wagging frantically, the signal she used when she'd found survivors. "Good girl," Sarah said, her heart racing. "How many?" Luna barked 3 times, paused, then barked twice more. 5 people. There were 5 people trapped in the next compartment. Sarah immediately began cutting through the welded wall, working as quickly as she could while trying to stay safe. The metal was thicker here, and it took nearly 20 minutes to cut an opening large enough for a person to pass through. When she finally pulled away the cut section, she was greeted by a sight that would haunt her for the rest of her life. 5 people, 3 women and 2 men, were huddled in the far corner of the compartment, blinking in the sudden light from her flashlight. They were emaciated, dirty, and clearly terrified, but they were alive. "It's okay," Sarah said in Spanish, remembering enough from her deployment to communicate basic reassurance. "I'm here to help. Estoy aquí para ayudar." One of the women, who appeared to be in her 30s, stepped forward cautiously. "You are American?" she asked in heavily accented English. "Yes, I'm American Navy. You're safe now." "How long have you been down here?" 3 months, the woman replied, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe more. We lost count." Sarah felt rage building in her chest. 3 months trapped in this floating prison, with no idea if rescue would ever come. What happened to the others? There were more people here, weren't there? The woman's expression darkened. They took them away, maybe 2 weeks ago. Said they were going to a different ship, but she shook her head. We heard screaming from the deck above, then nothing. Who took them? Who's been keeping you here? Men with guns. They spoke English, but also Russian, I think. They said we owed money for the trip to America, that we had to work to pay it back. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Commander Rodriguez. She answered quickly. Sarah, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for the past hour. I'm in the cargo hold, Commander. I found them. 5 survivors, but there were more. I think some of them were murdered. Jesus Christ. Are you safe? For now, but I don't know for how long. The people who were running this operation might come back. I've got a team en route to your location, ETA 20 minutes. Can you get the survivors to safety? Sarah looked around the cramped compartment, then up at the opening she'd cut in the wall. Getting 5 weakened people up through the cargo hold and onto the deck was going to be challenging, but not impossible. I think so. But Commander, there's something else. My uncle didn't just discover this operation. I think he was trying to help these people. The hatches were welded shut from the outside, but there's evidence that someone was providing food and water to the people trapped down here. That would explain why he contacted the FBI. He probably discovered the trafficking operation and was trying to figure out how to help without getting the victims killed. And someone killed him for it, Sarah said grimly. We'll sort that out later. Right now, focus on getting those people to safety. Sarah ended the call and turned back to the survivors. We're going to get you out of here, she told them. But we need to move quickly. It took nearly an hour to get all 5 people up through the cargo hold and onto the deck of the ship. They were weak from months of inadequate food and no exercise, and several of them needed to rest frequently during the climb. But Luna helped, using her training to guide and encourage the survivors. And eventually they were all standing in the fresh air and sunlight. The survivors were overwhelmed by their first taste of freedom in months. Some cried, others just stood in stunned silence, and one of the men fell to his knees and kissed the deck of the ship. Sarah was helping the woman who had spoken English earlier when she noticed a black SUV pulling up to the dock. 2 men got out. The same 2 men who had been talking to Pete earlier that morning. "Get down!" Sarah hissed, pulling the survivors behind a piece of deck equipment. "Luna, quiet!" The dog immediately dropped to a crouch, her training taking over. Sarah peered around the equipment and watched as the 2 men approached Pete's office. "This is bad," she whispered to herself. These men weren't here by coincidence. They knew she'd found something, and they were here to clean up loose ends. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us. Bring the cargo to Pier 12 in 1 hour, or everyone dies." Looking at the 5 terrified people huddled behind the rusted equipment, Sarah realized that her uncle's death had been just the beginning. Someone was willing to kill to keep this operation secret, and now she and the survivors were standing directly in their crosshairs. The sound of footsteps on the gangway told her that time was running out. The men from the SUV were coming aboard, and Sarah had to make a choice. Try to hide and hope Commander Rodriguez's team arrived in time, or find a way to fight back against people who had already proven they were willing to commit murder to protect their secrets. Luna looked at her with those intelligent eyes, waiting for orders. The survivors looked at her with desperate hope, trusting that the American who had freed them would also keep them safe. Sarah checked her watch. Commander Rodriguez's team was still 10 minutes away. 10 minutes that might as well be 10 hours, if the men coming aboard were armed and willing to use violence. But Sarah Chen hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by backing down from a fight. She'd survived by being smarter, faster, and more determined than the people trying to kill her. And she wasn't about to let these innocent people become victims again. Sarah's mind raced as the footsteps grew closer. She had 5 traumatized survivors, a dog, and whatever equipment she'd brought aboard to defend against at least 2 armed men who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. The odds weren't good, but she'd faced worse in Kandahar. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered to the survivors in Spanish and English. "Those men coming aboard are the ones who kept you prisoner. We need to hide until help arrives." The woman who spoke English grabbed Sarah's arm. "Maria," she said, pointing to herself. "My name is Maria Santos. These people, they killed my brother when he tried to escape. They will kill us all." "Not if I can help it," Sarah replied grimly. She looked around the deck, assessing their options. The superstructure of the ship offered multiple hiding places, but it also created potential traps if they were cornered. Luna's ears perked up, and she looked toward the gangway. The dog's body language told Sarah that the men were almost aboard. Time was up. "Follow me," Sarah whispered, leading the group toward a series of cargo containers that had been left on deck. The containers were rusted and partially collapsed, but they provided cover and multiple escape routes. They had just reached the containers when Sarah heard voices from the main deck. "Spread out," a man's voice called. "Check every compartment. If they're still aboard, find them." Sarah recognized the voice of the tall, thin man from earlier. She pulled out her phone and quickly texted Commander Rodriguez. "2 armed hostiles aboard. Need immediate assistance." The response came back instantly. "Team ETA 5 minutes. Stay hidden." 5 minutes. Sarah had to keep 5 weakened civilians and herself alive for 5 more minutes against professional killers who knew the ship better than she did. Luna pressed against her leg, and Sarah could feel the dog's tension. Luna was trained for combat situations, but she was also protective of civilians. If shooting started, Sarah wasn't sure she could control the dog's instincts to attack. "Sarah Chen!" The voice echoed across the deck, amplified by the ship's metal surfaces. "We know you're here. We know you found our cargo. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. These men had been running a human trafficking operation that had already resulted in multiple deaths, and they were talking about things not ending badly. "We just want to talk," the voice continued. "Your uncle was a reasonable man. We're hoping you'll be reasonable too." Maria grabbed Sarah's arm again. "They're lying," she whispered urgently. "They said the same thing to the others before they killed them." Sarah nodded, then made a decision that went against every instinct she had. Instead of staying hidden, she was going to create a distraction that would draw the men away from the survivors. "Luna, stay," she commanded quietly, then turned to Maria. "Keep everyone here. No matter what happens, don't come out until you see people in military uniforms." Before Maria could protest, Sarah slipped away from the containers and began moving toward the stern of the ship. If she could get the men to follow her, she could lead them away from the survivors and hopefully keep them busy until help arrived. She made her way to the ship's bridge, an elevated structure that would give her a tactical advantage and multiple escape routes. The bridge was accessible by 2 external stairways and had windows that would allow her to see the entire deck. Once she was in position, Sarah picked up a piece of rusted metal and threw it across the deck, where it clattered loudly against a bulkhead. The sound echoed through the ship like a gunshot. "There!" she heard one of the men shout. "Stern section!" Sarah smiled grimly. The bait had worked. She could see both men moving toward the sound, their attention focused away from where the survivors were hiding. But her satisfaction was short-lived. As the men approached the stern, she realized they were moving with the kind of tactical precision that suggested military or law enforcement training. These weren't just thugs. They were professionals. The shorter man was carrying what appeared to be a submachine gun, while the taller man had a pistol drawn. Both were wearing body armor under their suits. Sarah's phone buzzed with another text. 2 minutes out. "Can you see the hostiles?" She quickly typed back. 2 men, military training, automatic weapons, approaching stern section. The response was immediate. "Stay down, we're coming in hot." Sarah heard the sound of helicopter rotors in the distance, growing louder by the second. Commander Rodriguez hadn't just sent a team, she'd sent a full tactical response unit. The 2 men on deck heard the helicopter too, and their demeanor changed instantly. The careful, methodical search became urgent movement toward the gangway. "Time to go," the tall man called to his partner. "Clean up the loose ends and let's get out of here." Sarah's blood ran cold. Clean up the loose ends could only mean one thing. They were going to kill the survivors before they escaped. Without thinking, Sarah stood up in the bridge window and shouted, "Hey, you want to talk? Let's talk." Both men spun toward her voice, their weapons raised. Sarah ducked back down as bullets shattered the windows around her, glass raining down on the bridge deck. But her distraction had worked. Instead of heading toward the containers where the survivors were hidden, both men were now running toward the bridge, their attention focused entirely on her. The helicopter was directly overhead now, and Sarah could see tactical ropes dropping from its belly. Commander Rodriguez's team was fast roping onto the forward deck of the ship. "Federal agents!" a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Drop your weapons and surrender!" The response from the two men was immediate and violent. Automatic gunfire erupted across the deck as they engaged the federal agents. Sarah pressed herself against the floor of the bridge, trying to stay below the level of the windows as bullets flew in all directions. Luna's barking cut through the gunfire, and Sarah realized with horror that the dog had disobeyed her command to stay with the survivors. Luna was somewhere on the deck, probably trying to reach Sarah. "Luna! Down!" Sarah shouted, hoping the dog could hear her over the chaos. The gunfight lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, Sarah cautiously raised her head to look out the shattered bridge windows. The shorter man was down, motionless on the deck. The taller man was on his knees, hands behind his head, surrounded by federal agents in tactical gear. "Clear!" someone shouted. "Deck is secure!" Sarah stood up slowly, her ears ringing from the gunfire. "Commander Rodriguez?" she called out. "Sarah, are you hit?" "I'm okay. The survivors are hidden in the cargo containers near the port rail." As federal agents moved to secure the survivors, Sarah made her way down from the bridge, looking for Luna. She found the dog near the containers, standing guard over the 5 people who were now crying with relief as they realized their ordeal was finally over. Commander Rodriguez approached, removing her tactical helmet. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, kneeling down to embrace Luna. "But these people have been through hell. They need medical attention immediately. Paramedics are already on their way up. Sarah, what you did here today, it took incredible courage." Sarah looked at the survivors, who were being gently helped by federal agents, and thought about her uncle. "I just finished what Uncle Marcus started." "About that," Commander Rodriguez said, her expression growing serious. "We found some interesting things in the dead man's phone. This operation was bigger than we thought, and your uncle's involvement was more complex than we realized." "What do you mean?" "Your uncle wasn't just a witness to this trafficking ring. He was actively working to sabotage it. For the past 2 years, he'd been providing information to the FBI while simultaneously helping victims escape." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. He was trying to save them. He saved dozens of people, Sarah. But it cost him his life. The man we just arrested is Viktor Petrov, a Russian national with ties to organized crime. He's been running trafficking operations along the East Coast for over a decade. And he killed my uncle? We believe so. Marcus had gathered enough evidence to shut down the entire network, but Petrov found out about his activities. The heart attack that killed your uncle? Our preliminary investigation suggests it was induced by a drug that mimics natural cardiac arrest. Sarah stared at the man in handcuffs, feeling a mixture of rage and satisfaction. Her uncle had been murdered, but his killers were finally facing justice. "There's something else," Commander Rodriguez continued. "The ship itself. It's not just evidence in a criminal case. Your uncle left detailed records of his activities, including a list of other vessels and locations where trafficking operations might be active. He left a map? More than that. He left a complete intelligence package that's going to help us shut down human trafficking operations across the entire eastern seaboard." As paramedics arrived to treat the survivors, Sarah watched Maria Santos being helped onto a stretcher. The woman looked back at her and smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from any of the survivors. "Thank you," Maria called out in English. "You saved our lives." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. These 5 people would go home to their families. They would rebuild their lives. They would be free. But as she watched them being taken to safety, Sarah realized that her own life had just changed forever. The ship that had seemed like a burden that morning was now revealed as something much more significant, a weapon in the fight against one of the world's most evil crimes. "Commander," Sarah said, "what happens to the ship now?" "That's up to you. It's still your inheritance." But I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? The Navy is looking for people with your skills and experience to work on anti-trafficking operations. People who understand ships, who can think tactically, and who have the courage to do what's right even when it's dangerous. Sarah looked around the deck of the Meridian's Pride, thinking about her uncle's sacrifice and the lives that had been saved because of his courage. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to continue your uncle's work, to use this ship and your skills to help save more people like Maria and the others. Luna pressed against Sarah's leg, and she reached down to scratch the dog's ears. In Afghanistan, she'd fought to protect American soldiers and civilians. Here, she could fight to protect some of the world's most vulnerable people. What would it involve? Working with federal agencies to identify and investigate suspected trafficking vessels, using your engineering expertise to understand how these operations work, and when necessary, conducting rescue operations like the one you just completed. Sarah thought about the 5 people who were now free because she'd been willing to trust Luna's instincts and cut through a welded hatch. She thought about her uncle, who had died trying to expose the truth, and she thought about all the other victims who were still out there, waiting for someone to save them. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have conditions. Name them. Luna comes with me, and I want to be involved in the prosecution of everyone connected to this operation. These people need to see justice done." Commander Rodriguez smiled. "Done. Welcome to the team, Agent Chen." As the sun set over Baltimore Harbor, Sarah stood on the deck of the Meridian's Pride with Luna at her side, watching as the last of the evidence was collected and the survivors were taken to safety. The ship that had seemed like a burden that morning was now the foundation of a new mission. Her uncle had left her more than just a rusted cargo vessel. He'd left her a purpose. And with Luna's help, she was going to make sure that purpose was fulfilled. The ghost ship had given up its secrets, but more importantly, it had given 5 people their freedom and 1 woman her calling. In a world where evil often seemed to triumph, sometimes all it took was 1 person willing to cut through the barriers and shine a light into the darkness. And sometimes, that person had 4 legs and an unshakable instinct for finding those who needed to be saved. 3 months later, Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the newly refurbished Meridian's Pride, now officially designated as a federal law enforcement vessel. The ship had been completely rebuilt, equipped with the latest technology for maritime investigations and rescue operations. Luna sat beside her, wearing an official service dog vest that identified her as a federal agent. Together, they had already participated in 3 successful operations that had resulted in the rescue of 47 trafficking victims and the arrest of dozens of criminals. The prosecution of Viktor Petrov had made national headlines, and his conviction had led to the dismantling of one of the largest human trafficking networks in American history. Maria Santos had testified at his trial, her courage helping to ensure that he would spend the rest of his life in prison. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't in the headlines or the convictions. It was in the letters she received from survivors who had rebuilt their lives, in the families that had been reunited, and in the knowledge that her uncle's sacrifice had not been in vain. As she watched the sun rise over the Atlantic Ocean, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. An inheritance that had seemed like a burden had become a blessing. A ghost ship had become a vessel of hope. And a woman who had lost her way after leaving the military had found a new mission that gave her life meaning. Luna barked softly, alerting Sarah to something on the horizon. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see a cargo vessel that matched the description of a ship they'd been tracking for weeks. Another potential trafficking operation that needed to be investigated. "What do you think, girl?" Sarah asked, scratching Luna's ears. "Ready to go save some more lives?" Luna's tail wagged enthusiastically, and Sarah smiled as she reached for the radio to contact the Coast Guard. There was work to do, people to save, and justice to serve. The ghost ship had revealed its secrets, but the mission it had started was far from over, and Sarah Chen, with her faithful partner Luna at her side, was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because sometimes the most important inheritances aren't money or property. They're the opportunity to make a difference in the world, one life at a time. This incredible journey of courage, discovery, and justice has shown us that heroes come in all forms. sometimes with 2 legs, sometimes with 4. If this amazing story has inspired you as much as it has inspired us, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest content. Share this video with everyone you know because stories like Sarah and Luna's deserve to be heard by the world. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when you or someone you know showed incredible courage in the face of danger. Your stories matter and help build our amazing community. And don't forget to give this video a massive thumbs up to help us reach even more people who need to hear stories of hope and heroism like this one. Together, we can spread these powerful messages of courage and justice to every corner of the globe.